Hello, my name's Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and today I want to talk about not just two of our, uh, American presidents who were amongst the founding fathers, but an additional founding father, and I'm going to discuss, you know, uh, quote unquote intimate relations that they had together. Of course, I'm not being salacious. It was nothing salacious, and I'm talking about our second president, John Adams. Most people know of the famous friendship on and off BFF relationship with Thomas Jefferson, our third president. And I'm also going to include a third person, Benjamin Franklin. So these three men, of course, we first, for people who've studied American history, who enjoy American history like I do, you will notice one of the earliest moments of their working together was in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. So these three men were part of the Committee of Five, right? The Committee of Five who drafted the Declaration of Independence. Of course, in addition to these three men, that's John Adams, who represented Massachusetts, Benjamin Franklin, Pennsylvania, Thomas Jefferson, who represented Thomas Jefferson represented Virginia, and Benjamin Franklin, as I said, represented Pennsylvania, and John Adams, Massachusetts. There was also a guy called Roger Sherman. Roger Sherman represented Connecticut, I think, and there was Robert Livingston. I think Robert Livingston was from New York, if I can recall. Don't quote me on that. But Robert Livingston is also significant uh, in his association with James Monroe in the Louisiana Purchase under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson, which basically doubled the land size of America. So Robert Livingston accompanied James Monroe in the Louisiana Purchase. However, I'm talking about the other three men, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin today. So these three men had also been together in France during the War of Independence, right? So they were together in France around the period of 1784. So from 1776 to about 1785, Benjamin Franklin was our first diplomat, right? He was our first diplomat to France, and his role was to help in securing financing, and the support of France in America's Revolutionary War of Independence. And Benjamin Franklin did a fantastic job, being the uh, diplomat, the bon vivant and the womanizer par excellence that he was. So I have a little bit of uh, gossip to share from John Adams' diary. By the way, I think I should also mention the source that I used. Of course, I've read extensively on American presidents and the founding fathers, but um, most recently I used for Benjamin Franklin's biography, I used H.W. Brand's First American, right? His book biography of Benjamin Franklin, titled First American, the life and times of Benjamin Franklin, written by H.W. Brands. I also used David McCullough's John Adams, which I think they made an HBO, um, you know, docu series or whatever, a television series on, which was very popular. I liked it. I watched that show. Um, And of course, I use John Mitchum's Art of Power, Thomas Jefferson, the biography of Thomas Jefferson, written by John Mitchum. So I think I also there are also references from uh, uh, Ron Chenow's Alexander Hamilton, right? Ron Cheneau wrote an excellent biography of Alexander Hamilton, and he does some sort of a deep dive on a number of the founding fathers. It was a very resourceful uh, biography because it touches on other important figures as well. So these three men were in France simultaneously around 1784. And as I said, uh, Benjamin Franklin was there from 1776 to 1785. And so uh, John Adams would join him in 1784. John Adams, you know, he was a he had this amusing way of he kept a diary right throughout his life, and of course that's how we know a lot about him. And so he was constantly amused by Benjamin Franklin, right? Benjamin Franklin, of course, it was a notable polymath, right? It was America's first polymath, America's first Renaissance man, right? So Benjamin Franklin was was known to be a notorious womanizer and a bon vivant. He was known to be very sociable, right? And of course, he was the most famous American, right, in his time. He was known as Dr. Benjamin Franklin because he had all these accolades. Um, Let me give a little bit of background on Benjamin Franklin then. Benjamin Franklin ran away from Massachusetts. He was originally from Massachusetts, like John Adams. So he ran away from Massachusetts as a kid. You know, he didn't come from a family of means. He came from a large family, and he runs away and goes to Philadelphia. And he had initially been working for his brother at his printing press in Massachusetts. So he runs away, goes to Philadelphia, and he uh, you know, seeks his fortune on his own. And so he established a printing press, which became very successful. He actually had a newspaper, and he grew so big that later on he became, his printing firm would actually print notes, print currency for the American colonies. He would go on to print as many as 2.5 million money notes, right, for the American colonies. So he printed, and he innovated, counterfeiting, anti-counterfeiting features, right? Like he used watermarks and special ink and things like that. So he printed America's money, so that's why he's known as a polymath. He did many things. Now he didn't have a formal education, but he loved to read. And when he was working for his brother as a boy at the printing press, he would read the books, things that they were printing, they were publishing. And so he did, when he moved to Philadelphia, he established his own printing firm, which became very, very big. He started to print what was, a very famous almanac. It was called the Poor Richard's Almanac. His name was, he used a pseudonym, Richard Saunders. And, it was a very popular publication, and it included practical information, weather forecasts, witty sayings and aphorisms, and things like that. Um, so that was the Poor Richard's Almanac. It had a circulation about 10,000, yearly, and so he was. That's why he's known as a polymath. He got into a variety of different things, and of course, again, he didn't have a formal uh, school education. He didn't have formal schooling, but he did achieve. He's called Doctor Franklin because he acquired an honorary doctorate, right, from Oxford University. For his achievements, contributions to public service, and in science. So he would go on to he's very Benjamin Franklin is very famous for his experiments, scientific experiments on electricity, right? And of course, he invented the lightning rod, which protected buildings from from lightning, and he contributed to scientific lexicon by coining the term positive negative charge conservation, and so he did a lot in terms of his experimentation with electricity, and people know of his famous kite experiment, right? So Benjamin Franklin was America's first Renaissance man, and that was the objective of H.W. Brands in his biography of Benjamin Franklin. Of course, he was also a writer. He had a newspaper. He was America's first postmaster general, right? Postmaster general. So he uh, he also, at the end of his service as diplomat to France, when Thomas Jefferson relieved him, he left in 1785. He actually became president of Pennsylvania. Now, remember, the colonies were like countries on their own. Um, After the independence, the colonies, we didn't have a strong central government. And that's why Alexander Hamilton advocated for, he and James Madison, they wanted a strong central government, national government, which they called it, so that that was stronger than the states, and that was the purpose of the Constitution of 1787. And so he became president of Pennsylvania. That was really equivalent to the governor of Pennsylvania, and he did sign the U.S. Constitution of 1787. He was really advanced in age at this time, and of course, in when he was working in when he was working in France as well. So when John Adams went to meet him, when he went to join him in France, John Adams was really upset about the finances, the state of finances. So it's funny that even though Benjamin Franklin was a prominent businessman, he had been responsible for printing America's currency. And he did a great job in raising money and getting France to join the American cause. But he did it being a bon vivant, as I said. He did it, as a gregarious, he through his socializing, right? And so he was also known to be, the women in France were very important, right, in connecting with the court, right, the court of the king, because that's where they needed the money from. And so he was known to be a notorious womanizer. Uh, so John Adams, when he goes, he initially starts to observe him. He's observing him, and John Adams notes that even though so it was almost as if John Adams was trying to test his famed, that's Benjamin Franklin's famed genius. And so he 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 acknowledged that Benjamin Franklin could not really speak French, even though he'd lived there for about 9 years, 8 to 9 years. He wasn't proficient or really conversant in the French language, even though he dissembled to be, he pretended he was. John Adams, he thought he probably could just manage a few words and some sentences, and he wasn't really as conversant in the French language as he made out to be. That's Benjamin Franklin. And of course, he was, engaging in, dalliances with the women who they found him, like this delightful uncle, this delightful old man, right? Of course, he was struggling with gout and various ailments at the time because he was advanced in age, but he was very good company. And look, John Adams basically could not get along with anybody. The only two people he probably got along with were his wife Abigail Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Even Thomas Jefferson, they didn't get along for a while. Of course, John Adams was a very good father, right? At least to John Quincy Adams, because he and his son, they were the first father-son presidency relationship we had, right? So, and of course, he gave us the president with the highest IQ according to metrics. And maybe that was why a reason why John Adams was studying Benjamin Franklin in terms of his French language skills, because his son, John Quincy Adams, was very proficient in languages. He had a mastery of speaking many different languages. Of course, he started traveling with his father to Europe at a very early age. He traveled with him to France, to Holland, and then, of course, that's John Quincy Adams. He became a the secretary to the minister, America's minister to Russia as a teenager. He was his father's secretary as well. And so John Quincy Adams he was proficient in about seven different languages, right? And he remains the only American president who was fluent in Russian, right? He could write and speak fluently in Russian. So John Quincy Adams remains our only president who was fluent, who could speak Russian, right? He could, among the other languages, he spoke Dutch, French, of course, Latin. Um, you know, he could write and speak these various languages, right? So I guess that was the reason why. I guess because he'd been developing his son to become proficient in various European languages. I guess that's why he was sort of assessing the true depth of Benjamin Franklin's language skills. But that was not their only time, their only interaction, right? So they had another interaction. And that's why I called it intimate. So during a peace conference with Britain, they took a trip during the wars. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson would actually share a room. They shared a room, but they did not only share the room, they shared the same bed. So they had strange manners, I guess, back then. So John Adams and Franklin, they both slept together on the same bed. So a little conflict that John Adams notes in his diary occurred. John Adams wanted to shut the window because he believed in this old fable back then that the night air was dangerous. They called it dangerous, and it caused the spread of diseases. Now, Benjamin Franklin, who was the older man, who was much older than and all these guys, he was much older than John Adams. He wanted the window open, and he said that he was debunking John Adams' theory that the night air the night air spread diseases, right? And so Benjamin Franklin told him no, and he goes on to lecture John Adams, telling him about respiration, ventilation, and things like that. So he got him to leave the window open. John Adams was amused. So Benjamin Franklin was lecturing him. John Adams didn't even know when he'd fallen asleep and he was snoring off. But while Benjamin Franklin is still talking and is lecturing him, and so Benjamin Franklin was very interested in learning. He was a very curious man, and especially since it was remarkable, especially since he didn't have the formal education of the other founding fathers like John Adams. John Adams was a lawyer. He was actually a graduate of Harvard. He was our first president who graduated from Harvard. He was our first president who was a lawyer, right? Of course, we've since had numerous lawyers as presidents, right? So, of course, law is the most recurring profession of our presidency, right? So, John Adams, was kind of amused with. He was amused by Benjamin Franklin's rattling on, lecturing him about the ventilation, and he falls asleep, right? And so Benjamin Franklin, as I said, he was a remarkable man. By the way, his son went on to become. His son was governor of the state of New Jersey. His illegitimate son, right? And I guess that's another reason why he's rather infamous as a philanderer, right? A womanizer par excellence, as he put it. So he had an illegitimate son, William Franklin, who became the royal governor of uh, New Jersey. He was involved in the founding of Rutgers University in New Jersey, but he was a loyalist, right? He was a British loyalist. He was, and so after the outbreak of the war, he was actually imprisoned. That's Benjamin Franklin's son. He was imprisoned by the American forces for several years. He was placed in solitary confinement. But and eventually he got to go back to England. He went to England, and he lived the rest of his life and died in England. So he didn't join the Americans. To him, the Americans were rebels, which they were. So you know, Benjamin Franklin, like I said, he was a polymath. A polymath, by the way, in case anybody doesn't know, a polymath is somebody who's a man of very high learning, somebody, not a man or woman, somebody who's known for high learning in a variety of fields, not just one thing, right? Most people who we call geniuses are known for one thing, right? Like Albert Einstein is known for physics, right? But polymath is known for many different. He has the ability to learn many different things, and they're scholarly in these many different interests, right? And they are, they have a certain level of proficiency in these many different interests, right? And so Benjamin Franklin was a polymath given his experimentation in science, with electricity, his achievements in business, in writing. He was a writer, he was an inventor, he was a public servant, and he was our first postmaster general. And so he was awarded a doctorate, Doctor of Civil Law degree. By the way, when you're awarded an honorary doctorate, you're not supposed to call yourself doctor, except you're Benjamin Franklin. So Benjamin Franklin was called Dr. Franklin, but the social etiquette, the etiquette, right, academic etiquette or whatever, right, the proper thing to do in modern times is when you have an honorary doctor, you do not refer to yourself as doctor. You don't put it in your title. You just put it in your list of awards. So nobody refers to you as doctor. People who are called doctor are only people who have the earned doctorate. In fact, people who have a law degree in America, right? We have a doctorate in law, Juris Doctor. I have a doctor of law. Like we have our social etiquette, even though it is a doctorate, and if people can call, you're not barred from saying you're a doctor, but the etiquette in our profession in the legal field is not to refer to yourself as a doctorate unless you are an academic, you actually teach law, because a JD, Doctor of Law, is all you need to teach law at a university in America, right? So lawyers prefer to use Esquire because they don't want to mislead the public, right? And they have this thing that the layman, right? Lawyers constantly think of the public, the layman, that the layman will misunderstand it when you say doctor, that they think you're a medical doctor. That's actually how they argued it, right, in some of their ethical books. So um, Benjamin Franklin, in his lifetime, was actually referred to as Dr. Franklin. Because he was world famous, and Oxford University, of course, was a very famous institution. It still is today. He received a Doctor of Civil Law for his contributions in science and public service. And St. Andrews University also awarded him a doctorate, an honorary doctorate. St. Andrews, that's where Prince William, Prince of Wales, that's where he graduated from, and of course his wife, the Princess of Wales, as well, Katie. Um, so I think Harvard and Yale also gave him um, awards, honorary awards, but I think at the master's level, not a doctorate level. I guess they're stingy with their honoraries. So, um, yeah. So interesting that I mentioned, Oxford, and I will talk about the other intimate relationships between John Adams and his BFF Thomas Jefferson. So yes, it's their later correspondence, right? Their retirement correspondence over many years is very famous, right? They wrote each other for a very long time after they had been reconciled by their mutual friend, the founding father, Dr. Benjamin Rush. And so they wrote for a long time, and they're in the archives. But before that, in 1786, while John Adams was now minister to the court of St. James, minister was the equivalent of ambassador back then. So, and Thomas Jefferson had relieved Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson was minister to France. He visited England. He visited England for business, but he used it as an opportunity to actually tour England, right, with John Adams. So um, Thomas Jefferson can be considered another, yeah, polymath because he was an architect. He was interested in so many different things. Of course, he was the main author of the Declaration of Independence. John Adams had insisted that Thomas Jefferson, be the main author because of what he called his felicity of words, right? So he he was interested in architecture. That's Thomas Jefferson. He was an architect, and he was a farmer, right? He actually kept a journal for about almost 60 years on gardening, right? So he was interested in horticulture. So he and um, John Adams decided to tour England, right, the countryside. So the interests of Thomas Jefferson was for to get agricultural and horticultural, and architectural innovations to help him on his estate in Monticello. And because he spent his life experimenting on plants, gardening, writing about them, and his architecture, he actually designed his estates, in Monticello, his house. So he wanted to see the estates of the nobility in England. He toured those, and England is also renowned for its gardens, and so he wanted to tour this. Those were his interests, and so how he could borrow from uh, British architectural and agricultural practices and use them, uh, on his estates at Monticello. On the other hand, the interests of John Adams, were in history and literature. John Adams loved history. He was a history buff. He, like me, and of course, he loved literature. So he was interested in the historical and um, seeing literary sightings. So they went to William Shakespeare's birthplace, Stratford upon Avon. Of course, they also visited Oxford, and they also visited Birmingham, amongst other places that they went to Woburn and other places. So both of them had traveled together a long journey, in a carriage, right? It's called post chase or whatever. So they traveled together by carriage, and so um, again, um, that was another intimate relationship that our founding president, two of our founding presidents had, our founding fathers, with, of course, Benjamin Franklin and John Adams also sleeping together on a bed. Benjamin Franklin was never an American president, but he was president of the state of Pennsylvania, which was equivalent to the governor. Um, Now, it's very also important to remember that our founding fathers also had their quirks, right? When I've been talking about, the presidential history, and my objective has never been to do hagiography, right? Hagiography is something in which you're just idolizing someone. You're just idolizing someone like they're God in text. I don't do that, right? I guess when I was growing up, I read a lot of hagiographies. I read a hagiography um, of um, of Thomas Jefferson before, and I hated it, and many other presidents. I like those new uh, authors that are they're balanced, and they look into the nuances of the nuance in our presidents' lives. And so there was a an infamous unsavory incident in uh, Benjamin Franklin's life that actually damaged his reputation briefly. and it happened when he was a young man in his 30s. So Benjamin, most people know Benjamin Franklin was a Freemason. Many of our early founding fathers were Freemasons. So he was a Freemason, and of course he was a self-made man. I talked about how he got into reading. He established libraries, and he was very into self-improvement. Obviously, that's why he was a polymath, and so he was one of those people who joined the Freemasons, right? So there was this fake uh, fake initiation hazing that occurred that led to a man's death. And so I saw it in the book. I also read the article, that was printed in, is it called the Philadelphia Gazette, in which Benjamin Franklin, after the tragic death of the initiate, his name was Daniel Reese. He tries to defend, exonerate himself that he had no involvement in it. So, because it damaged his reputation. So, Daniel Reese was a simpleton, right? He was this simpleton in Philadelphia, and he was an apprentice to a doctor called Evans Jones, this brute. And so, Evans Jones cruelly indulged Daniel Reese, who had an interest in he lured Daniel Reese, rather who had an interest in becoming a Freemason. So him and some people, townspeople now, pretended that they were going to initiate Daniel Reese as a Freemason, and so they did this ritual in which Daniel Reese was made to kiss their posteriors, right, and you know, take an oath, blasphemous oath to the devil, satanic oaths, do a number of dehumanizing, indignities and things like that, perform a lot of things just for the, hazing ritual, just for the sake that he was ostensibly going to be joining the Freemasons. Of course, it was a fake initiation because he wasn't joining anything, right? So Daniel Reese was a simpleton that like the whole town knew he was slow. And so his boss, decided to exploit him, right? And, just have a laugh at his expense. Unfortunately, this led to his death because they were now using fires. At some point, they pretended that they were, that the devil was appearing, that they were invoking the devil. And so they had a fire and spirits, and the spirits, uh, Dr. Evans, Jones threw some spirit in the fire, and what's his name? Daniel Reese caught on fire himself, and so he died of his burns, 2 days after. There was Benjamin Franklin was called by the prosecution to be a witness because the initiation went on for days, and they were upping, the ante, they were making things worse, and Benjamin Franklin unfortunately had learned of it, right? Had learned of how they were making, a fool of this guy Daniel Reese, pretending that they were tricking him into believing that he was being inducted as a Freemason, right? And so they had Benjamin Franklin. Everybody knew Benjamin Franklin was a leader in the Freemason. So they had Benjamin Franklin do a Freemason greeting to Daniel Reese so he would really believe that he was a Freemason. And Benjamin Franklin cruelly did it, right? That was before he was killed. So Benjamin Franklin testified at the hearing, and Dr. Evans was charged for murder, but I think he was convicted for manslaughter. And so back then, if they convicted you for manslaughter, they branded your hand or something like that with an M for manslaughter. So he was branded. That was the extent of his punishment. So they cruelly had this young man killed. I guess that was one of the first hazing deaths, from a secret cult or a fraternity. And so this young guy, Reese, unfortunately, he died believing he was, being initiated as a Freemason, even though it was a fake initiation, and they were just making the whole town. They were just, this group of crewmen were just making a fool of him, having a laugh in Philadelphia. And unfortunately, our founding father Benjamin Franklin knew of it, and he didn't stop it. At some point, he said he claimed, that he was going to tell the boy and try and stop him from, believing his delusion, as he put it. So, and unfortunately, there was a perversion of justice in this instance, and I will talk about another instance of branding, and uh, a founding father who got to uphold justice. And a reason why I tend to admire John Adams a lot. So I admire the character of John Adams, right? Of course, he had a woeful administration, right? So he didn't have a great administration. So he was our first president who didn't get a second term. He was our first one-term president. Um, However, in terms of his character, there was something about John Adams' character that's admirable, right? He was a decent man. So at the time of when America was still a colony, the colonies were still under the British Crown. Everybody knows of the Boston Massacre that occurred. And in 1770, John Adams insisted on representing the British soldiers who were put on trial for the Boston Massacre. And John Adams had his reason for representing, the British soldiers, because he thought that it would help America's standing internationally, and it would prevent a British reprisal. Because remember, Britain was still the powerful mother nation. So this was 1770, and John Adams represents these British soldiers, and he got 6 of the 8 acquitted of all charges. Right, they went free. 2 of them were convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter, so they got branded as well. So just like Dr. Evans for uh, his fake initiation and hazing of Reese, his apprentice who died, he got branded on his hand as well. Uh, these 2 British soldiers who were convicted of manslaughter also got branded on their thumbs, with an M. And so John Adams was the one who successfully defended them, and so they escaped prison or the death penalty. So they just got branded on their thumbs, and they were set free. But the other 6, he got 6 fully acquitted, not guilty of all charges. And so we see that John Adams' advocacy is set the foundation for the establishment of rule of law, and that every defendant was entitled uh, every defendant was entitled to a fair trial, and this was what he wanted to establish in the colonies, to a fair trial and a competent counsel. So this was something that he insisted on. He thought it was important for the reputation of the American colonies, that they give these British soldiers, even though they were infamous, right, for the Boston for their role in the Boston massacre. He thought everybody was entitled to a fair trial, to have representation, legal representation, and so uh, these are principles that he propounded, he proposed, he stood on, and these principles, of course, made it into our the trial was in 1770. These principles would make it later on into the Bill of Rights, right, in 1791. And so it's part of our Constitution, right? Remember, to a fair trial, your right to a fair trial is in our Sixth Amendment. He insisted on due process of law. That's in our Fifth Amendment, right? So, and representation, having competent counsel, which he chose to represent the British soldiers, even though it could incite resentment against him, make him unpopular in the colonies, and especially since he successfully got the majority of them, 6 out of the 8, fully acquitted, not guilty. His defense was self defense, right? He said, well, that it was the crowds who provoked them. They were abusive, they attacked them, that the men feared for their lives, and so they acted in self defense. So he used evidence, he used the law, he used facts to get these men acquitted. And so you see those principles he stood on, having a fair trial. It's in the Sixth Amendment of our Constitution. The due process of law is in the Fifth Amendment, right? Having counsel, you're entitled to counsel. That's in the Sixth Amendment. So no matter how unpopular a person is, no matter the political uh, the political fervor, every defendant, everybody is entitled to a fair trial, right? And so, as I said, these made it into our constitution, and so in any event, let me stop here, and I will talk more. I think I would like to talk more about the Fifth Amendment since I've been doing videos discussing the internments of the Japanese Americans during the Second World War. But this is a good time to stop. And I like talking about American presidents. My name is Olurotimi Osha. Today I talked about the unfortunate hazing death of Reese, an apprentice who was tricked. He was a simpleton who was tricked that he was being initiated into the Freemason Society, and unfortunately led to his hazing death. Um, I similarly have been talking about the deprivation of my rights under color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the courts. Now, on May 16, what actually happened was I was also subjected to some kind of ritual, right? I was uh, deceived by the U.S. Navy, the United States Department of the Navy, which I was working for. They were putting me through a Navy General Officers Professionals Program. The objective was to haze me, was to actually gaslight me and make me misrepresent me as delusional, right? And so they could now get me hospitalized because it was done in retaliation uh, to my equal employment opportunity complaints against discrimination, harassment, and sexual harassment, and hostile work environment. Those are things I'm entitled to file. And of course, I filed a complaint with the offices of Inspector General concerning fraud, waste, and mismanagement of some of my supervisors, including Nathan R. Brown. I had filed complaints against Kirsten Risberg, who was a senior executive, and Jamie A. Simon, and against Nefertari McBride and Amakita Scott and Ruth Pollard. Now, the Auditor General of the Navy, it appears, now decides to participate because she was aware of it. So they did some kind of ritual, right? The Navy pretended that they were trying to recruit me into a Navy General Officer Professions program. Of course, bizarrely, these people thought I was a stupid person, because of their racism and xenophobia, right? And of course, it's shocking that how people who were actually delusional could have thought that I was delusional, and so they engaged in this uh, this gaslighting. We call it gaslighting today. And I couldn't have been called to be inducted into a Navy General Officers Professions program to become a general officer since I wasn't a service member, right? In any event, so these people had been calling me and they had used Columbia University's career portal to reach out to me. So this was their way of retaliating. So my university, my alma mater, participated in this violation, this civil violation of my civil rights, right? In this heinous crime, this despicable crime, right? This perfidious, conduct. Because here I'm interested in serving my new country. I'm an American citizen. And so they reach out to me. And so on that day, instead, they came and gaslighted me. But they had already planned ways to obstruct justice and to have me hospitalized. But the good thing is, uh, they're foolish. I don't know. I had them leave trails so I could point to the evidence. So I've been falsely charged by the state of Maryland on false charges. So people who hazed me also filed false charges against me. So what happened is that I've actually had these people, I had them leave trails. One of them is they sent me uh, an invitation. The Navy sent me an invitation, and Lieutenant Devon Blake sent me an invitation for a to participate for an appointment on May 15, 2023, right? And he rescheduled it via phone on May 16, 2023. The same day, Montgomery County Police ostensibly came to execute a perjured emergency evaluation petition. So they came, gaslighted me, they injured me, they shot me in the head. I have these scars on my forehead now. They're from stitches because they shot me in the head. They tasered me multiple times. I could have died. They gassed me, released a tear gas bomb in my home, and they spread disinformation to my neighbors, evacuating my building, saying I was a criminal holding a woman hostage. So you see, there's a history in America of bullying, hazing, abuses, and the Navy is notorious for this, right? I'm a law-abiding person. I'm not a violent person. I was only working in the Department of the Navy as a civilian to serve the American people, that I could have been abused and dehumanized. And even though I left a trail, right, that could get them convicted, prosecuted successfully and convicted, the Department of Justice has been mute. They've done nothing concerning this. The FBI has done nothing. Of course, they've been referring about back to Montgomery County Police to conduct do an internal affairs investigation. But of course, we know how that will end, right? You're asking the people who committed a crime to investigate themselves. That's a foolishness of a lot of and the wastefulness of the American government. The public service. When you ask people to investigate themselves, how are they going to how is it going to be a neutral investigation? So we've been going in circles. My rights have been deprived. It's been almost 3 years now, and it's unfortunate that we have this bully culture, this culture of perfidy and perfidious culture of bullying in America, and we see it went back all the way to even before America became independent, and we see, unfortunately, our founding father Benjamin Franklin, a Freemason, participated in what led to the hazing, fake initiation, and killing of an innocent man. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.